Hello, this is Will Hamilton and Tessa Stewart, and we are the editors for the Antimicrobial Drugs theme. So antimicrobials are pharmaceutical agents that are used to treat infectious diseases such as malaria, TB, HIV/AIDS. They all rely on having drugs in order to treat the disease, to cure people of the infections, or at least to manage the infections in the case of HIV. And there's a whole range of policy issues that concern the use of pharmaceutical agents, going right from drug discovery by the pharmaceutical industry and by scientists and universities, through to making the drugs, distributing the drugs where they're needed most. So that's particularly a problem in many developing countries where the infrastructure is not as good. They're vulnerable to infiltration by fake, falsified medicines, so you need to try and ensure that you have authentic, reliable supply of pharmaceutical drugs after they've been developed. And then you need to make sure that patients actually take their drugs as they're prescribed. So that's called adherence to medication, and that's a very important issue and relates to a lot of social problems such as stigma in the case of HIV, which can be a barrier to adherence to medication. And then it's very important that you stop drugs from becoming ineffective due to pathogens evolving resistance, because pathogens evolve much quicker than humans do. They have much shorter life cycles, and they have much larger population sizes, and that means that they can evolve much faster than humans do. So in only a few weeks or months, there's many generations of pathogen evolution, so they can develop resistance to drugs. And antimicrobial resistance is now considered a major threat to global public health. So that's the overview of the kinds of issues that we're looking at. And I'll hand over to my colleague now to describe the work that we're looking at in one particular case, which is for improving research and development in the pharmaceutical industry into agents to tackle novel emerging infectious diseases.
So we're going to be looking specifically at increasing access to medicines, and that would be for people in developing countries who the populations are suffering from infectious diseases and they need new medications because of this emerging resistance that has developed. And what's a particular problem is that of intellectual property. The new drugs that are being developed are still under patent, and therefore the developing countries can't afford to buy those medications for their populations. So our policies are looking at ways in which we can get around the intellectual property rights which restrict access to medicines in a number of different ways, looking at the different strata of the least developed countries, low-income countries, and middle-income countries. And in these ways, we have some of the suggestions are expanding the current medicine patent pool to become an essential medicine patent pool for all essential medicines on the WHO list. And this would involve cooperation with the pharmaceutical industry, but would allow it to continue and would also, in the end, allow generic drugs produced for these developing countries. We also are looking at amending patent law in middle-income countries who have manufacturing capacity and are able to produce drugs within their country, and by making small provisions and amendments to their patent law, basing it on that of India's patent law, we can then allow for domestic generic drug production and therefore an increased access to medicines.
Great. So I'll just briefly describe one of the other papers we're looking at, which is on antimicrobial resistance. And there's a whole range of strategies that we can use to try and tackle antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, which affects people in this country as well, from bacterial infections like methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, and also diseases right across the developing world, such as malaria and TB, where resistance is a very big problem there as well. What all of those infections have in common is that the pathogens have genetic changes which result in them being resistant to the drugs that we use. So by using new tools of DNA sequencing, we're able to track the epidemiology of resistance by measuring, for example, whole genome sequencing in the case of hospital infections, or by typing particular bits of the genetic code of parasites distributed right across the world, as with Plasmodium falciparum. So these genetic tools will allow us to have a very detailed map of the distribution, emergence, and spread of antimicrobial resistance, and that in turn can help guide public health policy. And this is an area that's already being explored by various groups around the world, and one of our papers discusses how that can be implemented on a wider scale.